The day my heart nearly stopped for good was the same day I realized my daughter valued her designer handbag more than my life. Standing in our kitchen, prescription in hand, I watched as Vanessa examined her manicured nails and told me that $220 for my heart medication was just too expensive this month. Not 20 minutes earlier, I'd transferred $4,800 to the prestigious Westlake Academy for her twins' quarterly tuition. Money she didn't know I had. Money she wasn't supposed
to know I had.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mom, you're being dramatic. Just skip a month. Dad lived with a heart condition for years without medication, she said dismissively, her attention already back on her phone. What she didn't understand was that my husband, her father, hadn't lived at all. He'd merely existed. And then he'd died, suddenly and painfully, right in front of us. The irony that I might follow the same path wasn't lost on me, especially when I recalled the countless sacrifices I'd made over the past decades to ensure she never wanted for anything. My name is Eleanor Wilson, though most people call me Ellie. At 68, my hands bear the testimony of a woman who has worked every day since she was 15. Calluses line my palms from years of scrubbing floors at the Meadowbrook Hospital, where I built my career from janitor to head of custodial services before retiring 5 years ago. Not exactly the glamorous life my daughter Vanessa had envisioned for her mother, but it had been honest work that put food on the table after my husband Thomas died of a heart attack 22 years ago. Thomas had been a dreamer, always chasing the next big idea but never quite catching it. When he passed away at 46, he left behind more dreams than dollars, and a 17-year-old daughter who'd grown accustomed to promises of wealth that never materialized. What he didn't leave was life insurance. Too expensive, he'd always said. The bitter irony of that phrase would echo through my life for decades to come. After the funeral, I discovered we were nearly $70,000 in debt. Credit cards, personal loans, and a second mortgage he'd taken out without telling me. The bank was ready to foreclose on our modest suburban home in Cedar Heights, and Vanessa was preparing for her senior year of high school with dreams of attending Westridge University, a private college with a price tag that made my stomach clench. I made a decision that night that would define the rest of my life. Vanessa would never know about the debt. She would never feel the crushing weight of financial insecurity that had kept me awake through my own childhood, listening to my parents argue about which bill to pay and which to ignore. She would go to her dream school. She would have the opportunities I never did. So I picked up extra shifts. I cleaned offices after my hospital job. On weekends, I worked at a local diner. I slept 4 hours a night for years. When Vanessa asked why I was never home, I told her I was building a better future for us. When she complained about eating spaghetti 3 nights a week, I reminded her that her tuition payments were up to date. By the time she graduated college with a business degree, I'd managed to pay off most of Thomas's debt while covering her education. My back ached constantly, and my hands developed an early tremor, but Vanessa walked across that stage in her cap and gown, and for a moment, it all seemed worth it. She married Brandon Reynolds 6 months later, a charming young man from a good family with connections in real estate development. I was happy for her, truly. Brandon had ambition like Thomas, but unlike my late husband, he had family money to cushion his endeavors. They bought a house in Lakeview Estates, the kind of neighborhood Thomas and I had driven through on Sundays, admiring homes we knew we'd never afford. When the twins, Parker and Penelope, were born 3 years later, Vanessa called me in tears. "Mom, I can't do this alone. Brandon travels so much for work, and the nanny can only do so much. I need you." By then, I'd moved to a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first place I'd ever lived that didn't carry the weight of Thomas's financial ghosts. I had started to build a small but meaningful life for myself. I had friends at the hospital. I'd joined a book club. I was learning to paint. But Vanessa needed me. So I packed my meager belongings and moved into their guest house, a converted pool house that was still 3 times the size of my apartment. The arrangement made sense. I would help with the twins while Vanessa managed her interior design business, and in return, I would live rent-free. What wasn't discussed was that I would also cook, clean, grocery shop, do laundry, and essentially run their household while Brandon expanded his real estate empire, and Vanessa focused on building her brand on social media, posting pictures of perfectly designed rooms and her perfectly dressed children. I told myself it was temporary, just until the twins started school. Then, Vanessa and Brandon decided only the best education would do. Westlake Academy boasted college placement rates that justified its astronomical tuition. They enrolled the twins for preschool, and I watched Vanessa's face fall when she saw the cost. "Mom," she said, chewing her bottom lip the way she did as a child when she wanted something she knew she shouldn't ask for. "We're a little overextended right now. Brandon's new development is tying up our liquid assets, and my business is still growing." I knew what was coming. I'd been saving every dollar I could from my pension, squirreling away money for the retirement I'd already postponed. But looking at my grandchildren's faces, Thomas's eyes staring back at me from Parker, my mother's smile on little Penelope's lips, I couldn't say no. "How much?" I asked. The relief on Vanessa's face was immediate. "Just for the first year," she promised. "Once Brandon's project sells, we'll take over completely." That was 4 years ago. Every quarter since, I've transferred money for their tuition from my savings account, an account that had taken me 15 years to build. Every quarter, Vanessa has had a new reason why they couldn't take over the payments yet. A downturn in the market, renovations to their house, a business opportunity too good to pass up. And every quarter, I've watched my dream of a modest but comfortable retirement slip further away. The painting classes stopped first, then the book club. I couldn't afford the gas to drive across town anymore, and I was too embarrassed to tell my friends that I couldn't even buy a paperback now and then. What Vanessa didn't know, what no one knew, was that beneath my careful management of everyone else's lives, my own health was failing. It started with shortness of breath, then chest pains that I dismissed as indigestion. When I nearly collapsed, while pushing the twins on the swings at the park, I finally went to see Dr. Hansen. "Ellie, your heart is working too hard," he said gently, after running tests. "You have a condition similar to what Thomas had. The good news is, medicine has come a long way in 20 years. With the right medication and some lifestyle changes, you can manage this." He wrote a prescription and gave me pamphlets about heart-healthy diets and moderate exercise. I nodded and smiled and calculated the cost in my head against what remained in my account after the twins' last tuition payment. It was then that Thomas's voice echoed in my mind. Too expensive. For the first time, I understood him. When you're balancing others' needs against your own, sometimes your own needs seem optional. I filled the prescription the first month, wincing at the $220 charge. The second month coincided with Parker and Penelope's school supply list. New backpacks, art materials, the special gym shoes required by Westlake. I skipped the refill. By the third month, I couldn't ignore the worsening symptoms. My ankles swelled. Climbing the stairs to the twins' bedrooms left me gasping. One night, I woke up feeling like an elephant was sitting on my chest. That was when I finally approached Vanessa, prescription in hand, while she sat at her marble kitchen island scrolling through her phone, her Hermes bag casually tossed beside her. "Vanessa, honey, I need to ask for a small loan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My heart medication, it's $220, and my pension doesn't come through for another 2 weeks." She glanced up, annoyance flickering across her face. "Mom, we just had to replace the pool heater. It was almost $5,000. Brandon's going to kill me if I touch the household account again this month. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I looked at her handbag, knowing it cost more than 6 months of my medication. I looked at the giant refrigerator with its dual ice makers and built-in coffee system. I looked at my daughter's perfectly highlighted hair, fresh from her weekly $200 salon appointment. "It's just until my pension comes in," I said. "I'm not feeling well without it." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Mom, you're being dramatic. Just skip a month. Dad lived with a heart condition for years without medication," she said dismissively, her attention already back on her phone. In that moment, something inside me shifted. A lifetime of sacrifice and silent endurance suddenly felt unbearable. I thought of the tuition payment I'd made that morning, money pulled from my dwindling emergency fund. I thought of Thomas, clutching his chest on our bedroom floor, gasping for breath as his heart failed him. I thought of the years I'd spent ensuring Vanessa never experienced the financial anxiety that had shadowed my own youth. And for what? So she could tell me my life wasn't worth $220? "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "your father died because he refused to take care of his health or acknowledge our financial reality. I've spent the last 2 decades making sure you never had to make the choices I did, including this morning when I paid $4,800 for the twins' tuition." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise. Not at my health condition, but at the mention of money she didn't know I had. "What tuition payment?" "Brandon told me his parents were covering that this quarter." And there it was, the first crack in the carefully constructed facade of their perfect life. I had just inadvertently revealed that either Brandon was lying to Vanessa, or they were both lying to me, letting me drain my savings while telling each other someone else was covering the expense. The look on Vanessa's face shifted from shock to calculation so quickly that I almost missed it. Then she smiled, the same smile she'd used as a teenager when trying to talk her way out of trouble. "Mom, there must be some confusion. Let me talk to Brandon tonight. In the meantime," she reached for her purse, pulling out 3 crisp $100 bills. "This should cover your medication with some leftover. We can't have you feeling unwell, especially with Parker's soccer tournament this weekend. You know how he loves having his grandmother cheering on the sidelines." I took the money, murmuring thanks, but something had fundamentally changed. For the first time in decades, I saw my daughter clearly, not as the child I'd sacrificed everything for, but as the adult she'd become partly because of those sacrifices. As I walked to my room in the guest house, I felt lighter somehow, despite the pressure in my chest. I filled my prescription that afternoon, swallowing the first pill before I even left the pharmacy. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my oldest friend Margaret, who I'd lost touch with after moving to Vanessa's. "Ellie Wilson, as I live and breathe," she answered on the 3rd ring. "I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth." "Almost," I said, surprised by the emotion welling in my throat. "But I'm finding my way back. Can we have coffee tomorrow?" As I waited for her answer, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. To my left lay the path I'd been walking for decades. Sacrifice, silence, putting others before myself until there was nothing left to give. To my right, an unmarked trail leading somewhere new. Margaret's warm laugh filtered through the phone. "Honey, I've been saving a seat for you at Rosie's Diner every Sunday for years. Tomorrow works just fine." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the twins' tuition money and Brandon's lie, about Vanessa's designer handbag and her dismissal of my health, about Thomas dying on our bedroom floor because facing our financial reality had been too painful for him. Mostly, I thought about the emergency fund I'd been depleting, money that had originally been meant for a small cottage by Lake Merrill, where I'd planned to spend my retirement years painting watercolors and hosting my grandchildren on weekends. That dream had faded so gradually I'd hardly noticed its disappearance. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. I just wasn't sure I had the courage to do it. But as I swallowed my heart medication with my morning coffee, medication that might have saved Thomas if he'd been willing to acknowledge his condition, I felt a new kind of strength taking hold. I was still Eleanor Wilson. I had survived poverty, widowhood, and decades of thankless labor. I had raised a daughter and helped raise her children. I had managed household budgets with pennies to spare and stretched dollars beyond what seemed possible. Now it was time to use those skills for myself before it was too late. Before my heart, literally and figuratively, couldn't take any more. As I walked toward the main house where Vanessa would already be orchestrating the twins' morning routine, I rehearsed what I would say. How I would finally speak my truth after decades of calculated silence. How I would reclaim the remaining years of my life before they too slipped away in service to others who wouldn't even notice my absence until the checks stopped coming. The kitchen was chaotic as usual, Penelope refusing to eat her organic oatmeal, Parker frantically searching for a school permission slip he'd forgotten to have signed, Vanessa simultaneously applying mascara and texting while trying to mediate between the children. "Grandma!" Penelope spotted me first, abandoning her breakfast to throw her arms around my waist. "Can you make me cinnamon toast instead? Mommy's oatmeal tastes like glue." Normally, I would have stepped in immediately, making the toast, finding Parker's form, allowing Vanessa to finish her makeup in peace. The well-oiled machine of our household relied on my constant, invisible labor. Instead, I hugged Penelope gently and said, "Actually, sweetie, Grandma needs to talk to your mom about something important. Why don't you try adding a little honey to that oatmeal?" Vanessa's eyes flicked up from her phone, registering my unexpected deviation from routine. "Mom, everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Perhaps I had. The ghost of the woman I used to be before I'd subsumed my identity to support everyone else's. The woman who had dreams of her own. "We need to talk," I said. "About the tuition payments and Brandon's parents, and why you thought it was okay to let me drain my retirement fund while lying about who was covering the cost." Vanessa's mascara wand froze mid-air. Parker and Penelope looked up, sensing the sudden tension in the room. Before Vanessa could respond, the back door opened, and Brandon strolled in, handsome in his tailored suit, oblivious to the storm about to break over his perfectly curated life. "Morning, family," he called out cheerfully, grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl. "Mom, don't forget the twins have early dismissal today for teacher conferences. Vanessa has that charity luncheon, so you'll need to pick them up at noon." He didn't ask if I had plans. Neither of them ever did. My time, like my money, was assumed to be at their disposal. "Actually," I said, my heart pounding but my voice steady, "I have an appointment today, and we need to have a family meeting tonight about the twins' tuition. I've been handling the payments for 4 years now, and it's time we discussed why Brandon told you his parents were covering this quarter when, in fact, I transferred the money yesterday." The kitchen went silent. Brandon's easy smile faltered, then disappeared entirely. Vanessa's face flushed red, whether from embarrassment or anger I couldn't tell. "Kids," Brandon said, his voice tightly controlled, "go finish getting ready for school in your rooms, now." As the twins scurried away, confusion etched on their small faces, I braced myself for the confrontation I'd avoided for so long. Part of me wanted to backtrack, to smooth things over as I always had. But the pressure in my chest reminded me of what was at stake. Not just my savings, but my life. "Ellie," Brandon said, switching to my first name as he did when trying to establish authority. "I think you've misunderstood something. My parents contributed to a college fund for the twins. That's probably what Vanessa was referring to." Vanessa nodded quickly, too quickly. "Exactly, Mom. I never said they were paying this quarter's tuition directly. The ease with which they lied, the seamless way they closed ranks against me, it was breathtaking in its callousness. These were the people I'd given everything for. "Stop," I said, holding up a hand. "Just stop. I have the transfer confirmations from my account to Westlake Academy going back 4 years. Every quarter, without fail. That's over $70,000 I've paid while living in your pool house and raising your children, after spending decades ensuring Vanessa never felt the financial insecurity I grew up with." Brandon's expression darkened. "No one asked you to pay the tuition, Ellie. That was your choice. We would have figured something out." "Would you?" I asked. Because when I asked for $220 for medication to treat the same heart condition that killed Thomas, Vanessa told me it was too expensive, while wearing a handbag that cost more than my monthly pension. Vanessa at least had the grace to look ashamed, but Brandon was already shifting to damage control mode. He'd built his career on talking people into parting with their money. I could practically see him calculating his approach. "Look, we're family," he said soothingly. "We support each other. If you're having financial difficulties, we can discuss a monthly stipend that covers your medical needs." "A stipend," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "For the woman who's been the backbone of your household? Who's been paying private school tuition while you renovate vacation properties and buy luxury cars?" Vanessa stepped in, her expression softening into the calculated sympathy she used in Instagram posts about mindfulness and gratitude. "Mom, we appreciate everything you do for us. You know we do. But you chose to help with tuition. You offered, because you said it was temporary." My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. 4 years ago, you said, just until Brandon's project sells. How many projects have sold since then, Brandon? How many commissions have you collected while letting me believe you couldn't afford your own children's education? The silence that followed was damning. Brandon stared at the Italian marble countertop, unable to meet my eyes. Vanessa bit her lip, that childhood tell revealing her discomfort with the truth. Finally, Brandon spoke. "We should have been more transparent about our finances. That's on us. But Ellie, you have to understand. Appearances matter in my business. The house, the cars, Vanessa's social media presence, it's all part of the image that brings in clients. We're building something here." "At my expense," I said quietly. "We were going to pay you back," Vanessa interjected. "Once Brandon's lakefront development is completed, the returns will be enough to cover everything you've contributed and set up a comfortable retirement for you." I'd heard Thomas make similar promises for 20 years. Always the next deal, the next opportunity. Meanwhile, life slipped by, and debt accumulated. "I don't want promises," I said. "I want my life back. I'm 68 years old with a heart condition. I don't have time to wait for your next big success." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Listing I'd printed at the pharmacy yesterday after filling my prescription. A small one-bedroom cottage on the outskirts of Lake Merrill. Not the lakefront property I'd once dreamed of, but within my budget if I stopped paying Westlake tuition. "This is where I'll be moving next month," I said, sliding the paper across the counter. "The twins are welcome to visit on weekends. I'll still be their grandmother, and I'll still love them more than anything. But I won't be your live-in childcare anymore, and I won't be funding their education." Brandon barely glanced at the listing. "You can't be serious. Where are we supposed to find quality childcare on short notice? Do you know what a full-time nanny costs in this area?" The irony was so thick I could almost choke on it. He was worried about childcare costs while standing in a kitchen that had been renovated to the tune of $75,000 last year, more than I'd made in my best years at the hospital. "I imagine it costs about what you've been saving by having me do it for free," I replied. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. "So you're just abandoning us? After everything we've done for you?" "Everything you've done for me?" I echoed incredulously. "Vanessa, what exactly have you done for me in the last decade?" "We gave you a place to live," she shot back. We included you in our family. Without us, you'd be all alone in some depressing apartment living on your pension. Without you, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotion inside me. I'd have enough savings for the retirement I worked my entire life for. I'd have my friends, my hobbies, and my health, which I've neglected while prioritizing your family's needs. I turned to leave before either of them could respond, pausing at the doorway to add, I'm going to my doctor's appointment, then meeting an old friend for coffee. I suggest you use this time to figure out your childcare situation going forward, and perhaps explain to your children why appearances matter more to you than honesty. As I walked back to the guest house to get my purse, my phone dinged with a text. I expected it to be from Vanessa or Brandon, already launching their campaign to change my mind. Instead, it was from Margaret. Can't wait to see you, Ellie. I've missed your laugh. When was the last time anyone had missed my laugh? When was the last time I'd laughed freely, without the weight of others' expectations pressing down on me? I couldn't remember. But as I backed my old sedan out of the driveway, leaving behind the beautiful prison I'd helped build, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't experienced in decades, hope. And for the first time in years, my chest didn't feel tight at all. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, driving away from Vanessa's house. 20 years of silently carrying everyone else's burdens had taken its toll. And now that I had finally stood my ground, my body seemed to be in shock. I pulled into the parking lot of Meadowbrook Medical Center, where Dr. Hansen had been treating me, and where I had spent decades scrubbing floors before working my way up to management. The familiar white building with its blue-tinted windows had once been my second home, a place where I'd found purpose and community. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering my composure. My phone had begun buzzing incessantly, Vanessa's name flashing across the screen with increasing frequency. I switched it to silent and slipped it into my purse. Whatever crisis she was manufacturing would have to wait. For once, my health needed to come first. The receptionist at Dr. Hansen's office, Judy, brightened when she saw me. Ellie, so good to see you're keeping your appointment this time. Dr. Hansen was worried when you canceled the last two. I felt a flush of shame. I'd skipped those appointments because they'd conflicted with Parker's science fair and Penelope's dance recital. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd prioritized my grandchildren's activities over the very health checks. That would determine whether I'd be around to see them grow up. I'm trying to do better, Judy, I said, signing in. No more cancellations. Dr. Hansen's concerned face when he reviewed my vitals confirmed what I already knew. My condition had worsened. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the echocardiogram showed my heart was struggling more than it had been 3 months ago. Ellie, he said gently, have you been taking the medication consistently? I shook my head, explaining the financial strain and my irregular usage. His expression darkened. This isn't optional treatment. Your heart is working too hard. At this rate, without consistent medication and some lifestyle changes, we're looking at a major cardiac event within months, not years. The severity in... His voice made me sit up straighter. I filled the prescription yesterday, I assured him, and I'm making some living adjustments that should reduce my stress levels. Dr. Hansen studied me for a moment. You were our head of custodial services for 15 years? The hospital's long-term care insurance should be covering more of these medication costs. Let me call Denise in billing and see what's happening. While he stepped out to make the call, I stared at the anatomical model of a heart on his desk. So small, yet responsible for so much. Just like me, I thought wryly. I'd been the small but essential engine keeping multiple lives running smoothly, never drawing attention to my own needs until the machinery began to fail. Dr. Hansen returned, with a puzzled expression. Ellie, according to Denise, your insurance coverage was reduced because you opted out of the extended benefits package during your retirement processing. She says there's a form with your signature declining the additional coverage. I frowned. trying to recall signing such a document. My retirement had been a whirlwind. Vanessa had just announced her pregnancy with the twins, and I'd been helping her and Brandon search for their new house. I'd left much of the paperwork to Brandon, I whispered, the realization dawning. My son-in-law is an insurance broker. He offered to handle my retirement paperwork to simplify things. Dr. Hansen's face remained carefully neutral, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Well, the good news is, we can file for reconsideration based on your medical necessity, and in the meantime, I can provide you with some samples to supplement your prescription. He opened a cabinet and retrieved several boxes of medication, placing them in a paper bag. This should get you through the next month while we sort out the insurance situation. And Ellie, he added, his voice gentle but firm, whatever is going on in your personal life, you need to make your health the priority now. Your heart can't take much more neglect. I clutched the bag of medication samples, feeling simultaneously grateful and foolish. How had I let things get so far? How had I become so diminished that I couldn't even ensure my own survival? Thank you, Richard, I said, using his first name as I had when we'd worked in the same building for years. I'm making changes, starting today. As I left the medical center, I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls from Vanessa, 5 from Brandon, and a text from the twins' school asking where I was. They'd been waiting at early dismissal for 45 minutes. Early dismissal. I'd completely forgotten in the midst of everything else. For a moment, panic seized me. The ingrained response of someone who had spent years prioritizing others' schedules above her own needs. My finger hovered over Vanessa's number. Then, I remembered our confrontation that morning. Their reaction had not been concern for my health or regret for their deception, but anger at the inconvenience my self-advocacy would cause them. I took a deep breath and called the school directly. This is Eleanor Wilson, Parker and Penelope. Reynolds' grandmother, I said when the school secretary answered. I apologize for the confusion, but I'm not able to pick up the children today. Their parents will need to make arrangements. I see, the secretary said, surprise evident in her voice. In 4 years, I had never failed to appear when expected. We'll contact Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds immediately. As I hung up, a text from Vanessa popped up. Where are you? The school is calling me and I'm in the middle of the charity luncheon. I can't believe you would do this to the kids. No mention of my health, no acknowledgement of our morning conversation, just anger that I'd disrupted her schedule. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to Rosie's diner, where Margaret had suggested we meet. I was an hour early for our coffee date, but I needed time to collect myself before seeing my old friend. Rosie's hadn't changed in the years since I'd last visited. The same red vinyl booths, chrome-edged tables, and black and white checkerboard floor. The waitress, a young woman with a friendly smile, led me to a booth by the window and brought me a cup of coffee without asking. Margaret called ahead, she explained. Said you'd probably need this before she arrived. She also said to tell you she's running about 30 minutes early, so she'll be here soon. I thanked her, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and stared out at the parking lot. My phone continued to buzz with messages from Vanessa and Brandon, but I ignored them. For the first time in decades, someone else's emergency wasn't my crisis to solve. Margaret arrived exactly half an hour later, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob I didn't recognize, but her warm brown eyes exactly as I remembered. She spotted me immediately and hurried over, sliding into the booth across from me. Ellie Wilson, she said, reaching across to squeeze my hand. You look exactly the same, and completely different all at once. I laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. That's precisely how I feel. Margaret had been my closest friend for 30 years before I'd moved into Vanessa and Brandon's guest house. We'd started as janitors at the hospital together, raised our children as single mothers after both becoming widows in our 40s, and supported each other through every hardship life had thrown our way. until I'd gradually stopped returning her calls, too exhausted from managing Vanessa's household to maintain my own relationships. "I've missed you," I said simply. Margaret nodded, her eyes kind but knowing. "I've missed you too, but I always knew you'd find your way back when you were ready." She studied my face for a moment. "Something's happened. Want to tell me about it?" The story poured out of me then, the years of tuition payments draining my savings, my worsening heart, condition, the callous dismissal of my health needs, and finally, this morning's confrontation. Margaret listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or squeezing my hand when my voice wavered. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you remember what you told me when I was killing myself working 3 jobs after Harold died? When I was so determined that Samantha would have the same opportunities as her friends with 2 parents?" I shook my head, struggling to recall a conversation from more than 20 years ago. "You said, 'Margaret, if you die trying to give Samantha everything, you'll end up giving her nothing at all.' You made me promise to take 1 night off a week, to remember that my daughter needed a living mother more than she needed new clothes or dance lessons." Margaret's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I listened to you, Ellie. I cut back my hours. I made sure Samantha understood the value of money and hard work. And now she's a nurse practitioner with 2 kids who appreciates everything she has because she knows what it costs to provide it." I swallowed hard against the lump forming in my throat. I gave the same advice I couldn't follow myself. "It's not too late," Margaret said firmly. "You stood up for yourself this morning. That's the first step. What's your next move?" I pulled out the listing for the cottage by Lake Merrill. "I'm buying this place. It's small, but it's close to the lake. I can paint again, like I always wanted to." Margaret examined the listing, then looked up with a smile. "It's perfect, Ellie. Absolutely perfect." "But what about the twins?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me since I'd driven away from Vanessa's house. "I'm so angry with their parents, but Parker and Penelope are innocent in all this. They're used to seeing me every day. What if Vanessa and Brandon turn them against me out of spite?" Margaret considered this. "Children are more perceptive than we give them credit for. They know who genuinely loves them. Distance might change your relationship with them, but it doesn't have to end it." She paused. "And frankly, Ellie, what kind of example are you setting for those kids by letting their parents exploit you? Do you want Penelope to grow up thinking it's normal to take advantage of family? Or for Parker to learn that his grandmother's health is less important than his private school tuition?" Her words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on what I was giving the twins, financial support, consistent care, a sense of security, that I hadn't considered what I was teaching them by allowing their parents to treat me as disposable. "You're right," I said quietly. "I need to model self-respect, not self-sacrifice." "Exactly." Margaret flagged down the waitress and ordered us both a slice of apple pie. "Now, tell me more about this cottage. When can you move in?" For the next hour, we talked about practical matters, the cottage purchase, what furniture I'd need, how to handle the inevitable confrontation when I formally gave notice to Vanessa and Brandon. Margaret offered her spare bedroom if I needed a place to stay during the transition and promised to help me move when the time came. When we finally parted outside the diner, Margaret hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you, Ellie. It takes courage to change course after so many years." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "But I'm more afraid of what will happen if I don't make this change." "That's wisdom," she said, stepping back to look me in the eye. "Call me anytime, day or night. I mean it. You're not alone in this." As I drove back to Vanessa's house, not home, I reminded myself, just a temporary residence, I felt simultaneously lighter and heavier. The burden of perpetual sacrifice had been partially lifted, but the weight of confronting decades of enabling behavior pressed down on me. The house was quiet when I arrived. Brandon's car was gone from the driveway, but Vanessa's white SUV was parked in its usual spot. I braced myself for the storm as I walked toward the guest house, hoping to pack an overnight bag before facing my daughter again. I didn't make it that far. Vanessa was waiting on the steps of the guest house, her face blotchy from crying, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. "Where have you been?" she demanded, standing as I approached. "The school had to call Brandon away from an important client meeting. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for him? For me?" I stepped around her to unlock the guest house door. "I had a doctor's appointment. I told you that this morning." "You could have rescheduled. The kids were waiting, Mom. They thought you'd forgotten them." The guilt trip that had worked so effectively for years now slid off me like water. "I didn't forget them, Vanessa. I chose not to pick them up. There's a difference. Their parents are perfectly capable of handling their own children's schedules." She followed me inside, her voice rising. "What has gotten into you? First that ridiculous scene this morning, and now this. If you're trying to punish us over some misunderstanding about tuition—" "This isn't about punishment," I interrupted, turning to face her. "This is about me finally recognizing that I can't set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm. Not anymore." I gestured to my chest. My heart literally can't take it. For the first time that day, Vanessa seemed to actually look at me. The pallor of my skin, the slight swelling in my ankles, the fatigue evident in my posture. A flicker of concern crossed her face, quickly replaced by defensive anger. "So you're just going to abandon us? After everything we've done for you?" "What exactly have you done for me, Vanessa?" I asked quietly. "Allowed me to live in your guest house while I pay your children's tuition? Let me cook and clean for your family while you build your business? Given me the privilege of raising your children while you and Brandon maintain the lifestyle you feel entitled to?" Her mouth opened and closed, struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal the transactional nature of our relationship. Finally, she said, "We gave you a purpose, Mom. Without us, what would you even do all day? You'd be alone in some depressing apartment with nothing but your TV for company." The casual cruelty of her assessment, that without serving her family my life would have no meaning, struck me like a physical blow. Was that truly how my daughter saw me? Not as a woman with her own dreams and desires, but as a resource to be utilized for her convenience? "I had a life before you were born, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt. "And I'll have one after I leave here, one that includes painting and friendships and taking care of my health so I can enjoy whatever time I have left." "You're being dramatic," she scoffed, though uncertainty had begun to creep into her expression. "Your heart condition isn't that serious. Dad lived with his for years." "Until he didn't," I reminded her. "Your father died at 46 because he refused to acknowledge the severity of his condition or adjust his lifestyle. I'm 68. I don't have the luxury of denial anymore." I moved past her to the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the closet. As I began packing clothes and toiletries, Vanessa watched from the doorway, her anger gradually giving way to alarm. "Wait, you're leaving? Right now? What about dinner? The twins will be expecting you to help with their homework," I continued, packing methodically. "I'm staying with Margaret tonight. I'll come back tomorrow to pack more of my things and speak with the twins. They deserve an explanation about why I'm moving out." "Moving out?" Vanessa's voice rose in panic. "Mom, you're overreacting. Yes, we should have been more transparent about the tuition situation, but that's no reason to tear apart our entire family dynamic." I zipped the suitcase closed and set it on the floor. "Our family dynamic, as you call it, is built on my exploitation, Vanessa. It only works if I continue to sacrifice my health, my savings, and my independence for your convenience. I'm not willing to do that anymore." She switched tactics, tears filling her eyes. "The twins will be devastated. They adore you. How can you do this to them? I'm not doing anything to them. I'll still be their grandmother. I'll still see them regularly. I just won't be their live-in caretaker anymore. I picked up my suitcase. And perhaps this will be an opportunity for you and Brandon to develop deeper relationships with your children, instead of outsourcing their care to me. Vanessa's face hardened. If you leave like this, don't expect us to welcome you back when you realize how lonely you are without us. I almost laughed at the irony, that she thought I would be lonely without them, when I'd been isolated for years within their household, cut off from my friends and interests to serve their needs. Instead, I simply said, I'll be back tomorrow. To talk to Parker and Penelope. Please make sure they're home after school. As I walked to my car, Vanessa called after me, her voice cracking. Mom, you can't just walk away from your family. I turned back, suddenly exhausted by the emotional toll of the day. I'm not walking away from my family, Vanessa. I'm walking toward myself. There's a difference. The drive to Margaret's house was quiet. I'd turned off my phone after leaving Vanessa's, unwilling to subject myself to more manipulative texts or calls. The weight of confrontation had left me drained, but beneath the fatigue was a current of something that felt remarkably like freedom. Margaret was waiting on her porch. When I arrived, a glass of iced tea in hand. Her small bungalow was exactly as I remembered it, meticulously maintained, with cheerful yellow trim and flower boxes bursting with petunias. It looked like a home, I realized. Not a showpiece like Vanessa and Brandon's house, but a place where someone actually lived. You made it, she said, coming down the steps to help with my suitcase. I was about to call search and rescue. I managed a tired smile. I had to face Hurricane Vanessa first. And you survived. She looped her arm through mine, leading me inside. That's worth celebrating. I opened a bottle of wine unless that interferes with your medication? One glass should be fine, I said, following her into the cozy living room. Though at this point, I'm so tired I might fall asleep halfway through it. Margaret laughed. Then we'll save it for tomorrow. I made up the guest room with fresh sheets, and there's a new toothbrush in the bathroom. Everything else can wait until you've had some rest. The simple kindness of her preparation, making sure I had clean sheets and a toothbrush, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. How long had it been since someone had anticipated my needs instead of the other way around? Thank you, I managed, trying to blink away the moisture before Margaret noticed. She saw anyway, her expression softening. Oh, Ellie, you've been carrying too much for too long, haven't you? The gentle understanding in her voice broke something loose inside me. A dam of emotion I'd been holding back for years. The tears came then, not in a dramatic sob, but in a steady stream that seemed to have no end. Margaret guided me to the sofa and sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders as I cried for all I'd sacrificed, all I'd enabled, and all I'd lost in the process. I don't even know who I am anymore, I whispered when the tears finally began to subside. I've spent so long being Vanessa's mother and the twins' grandmother that Eleanor has disappeared completely. Margaret handed me a tissue. She hasn't disappeared. She's just been waiting for you to remember her. Later that night, after a simple dinner and a warm shower, I lay in Margaret's guest room staring at the ceiling. The bed was narrower than the one in Vanessa's guest house, the room smaller and less lavishly appointed. But for the first time, in years, I felt as though I could breathe fully, without the weight of others' expectations pressing down on my chest. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, buzzed with a text message. Expecting another manipulative message from Vanessa, I almost didn't check it. When I did, I was surprised to see it was from Parker, using Vanessa's phone. Grandma, are you mad at us? Mom says you're not coming home tonight because we didn't clean our rooms good enough. I'm sorry. Please come back. My heart clenched. At the realization that Vanessa was using her own children as emotional leverage, making them believe they were somehow responsible for my absence. I typed back carefully. Parker, I love you and Penelope more than anything in the world. I'm not mad at you, and this has nothing to do with your rooms. I'm staying with my friend Margaret tonight because I need some rest. I'll see you tomorrow after school and explain everything then. You didn't do anything wrong. I promise. I hesitated, then added, P.S. Well enough, not good enough. Don't forget your grammar, even in text messages. His response came immediately. Okay, love you, see you tomorrow. Mom says to tell you Penelope won't eat her breakfast if you're not here. I didn't respond to that obvious manipulation, simply turning off the phone and placing it on the nightstand. Tomorrow would be difficult, explaining to the twins that I was moving out, standing firm against Vanessa and Brandon's emotional blackmail, beginning the process of reclaiming my life. But for tonight, in this quiet room with no one's needs to attend to but my own, I would rest. Before sleep claimed me, I found myself thinking of the cottage by Lake Merrill. I could already picture myself there, sitting by the window with a sketch pad, watching the water change colors as the sun moved across the sky. Perhaps the twins could visit on weekends, and I would teach them to paint watercolors as I'd always wanted to. Not as their caretaker, but as their grandmother, a relationship based on love rather than obligation. For the first time in decades, I fell asleep looking forward to what tomorrow might bring, rather than dreading the weight of responsibilities I'd have to shoulder when morning came. And though I couldn't be certain, I thought I felt my heart beating just a little more steadily, as if it too sensed that healing had finally begun. The morning light streamed through Margaret's guest room curtains, waking me gently. For a moment, I was disoriented. The unfamiliar bed, the absence of the twins' morning chatter, no breakfast to prepare. Then I remembered. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. Today, I would take another. I reached for my heart medication on the nightstand, swallowing it with the glass of water Margaret had thoughtfully left for me. The simple act felt like a declaration. My health mattered. I mattered. The smell of coffee drew me to the kitchen where Margaret stood at the stove flipping pancakes. She turned with a smile when she heard me enter. Look who's finally up. It's almost 8. I was beginning to think you'd sleep through the apocalypse. I glanced at the clock in surprise. 8 o'clock? When was the last time I'd slept past 6? At Vanessa's, my days began at 5:30 a.m. to ensure the twins had freshly packed lunches and ironed uniforms before school. I can't remember the last time I slept so deeply, I admitted, accepting the mug of coffee Margaret offered. That's what happens when you're not listening for other people's needs all night. She slid a plate of pancakes across the counter. Eat. We have a busy day ahead of us. We do, absolutely. Margaret joined me at the counter with her own plate. First, we need to call the real estate agent about that cottage. Then I thought we'd stop by the hospital to talk to Denise in billing about your insurance situation. After that, a quick trip to the bank to discuss your finances, and finally, a stop at the cottage so you can see it in person before you commit. I blinked at her detailed itinerary. You've been busy planning. One of us needs to be practical, she said with a gentle smile. You're in the emotional whirlwind of breaking free from your daughter's household. I'm just making sure you have solid ground to land on. The wisdom of her approach was undeniable. While part of me wanted to rush headlong into my new life, Margaret's methodical plan would ensure I didn't trade one precarious situation for another. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Margaret asked, What time are you planning to talk to the twins today? They'll be home from school around 3:30, I said, calculating the timing in my head. I want to speak with them privately, if possible, without Vanessa or Brandon hovering. Margaret nodded. We'll make sure you're back by then. In the meantime, she reached for her phone. Let's call about that cottage while we finish breakfast. To my surprise, The real estate agent answered immediately and remembered both me and the property. Even more surprising was her news. The owner was eager to sell and would consider a slightly reduced price for a quick closing. When I mentioned I'd like to see the cottage that day, she offered to meet us there at noon. Margaret gave me a triumphant look as I ended the call. See? The universe is already aligning to help you. Now finish your pancakes so we can get to the hospital before the billing office gets busy. The morning passed in a whirlwind of productivity. At the hospital, Denise in billing confirmed what Dr. Hansen had suspected. My insurance had been downgraded during my retirement processing. She was horrified to learn that Brandon may have deliberately mishandled my paperwork. Ellie, this is potentially insurance fraud, she said gravely. If your son-in-law purposely had you sign forms without proper explanation. I shook my head, unwilling to pursue that possibility just yet. Let's focus on restoring my coverage first, if that's still possible. Denise nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line of determination. Leave it with me. I've worked with Dr. Hansen for 15 years. If he says your condition requires the extended coverage, we'll make it happen retroactively. At the bank, I met with a financial advisor who reviewed my accounts with growing concern. The quarterly tuition payments had indeed drained my savings significantly, but what remained was still enough to purchase the cottage outright if I chose to. What troubled the advisor more was a series of smaller withdrawals I didn't recognize. $200 here, $500 there, scattered throughout the past 2 years. These weren't made by you? He asked, highlighting the transactions on the statement. I stared at the dates, recognition dawning. Those withdrawals coincide with times Vanessa asked to borrow my debit card for emergencies when she'd supposedly forgotten hers. The advisor's expression hardened. Ms. Wilson, I recommend we close this account immediately and transfer the remaining funds to a new one with enhanced security measures. It appears someone has been systematically taking advantage of your financial trust. By the time we left the bank, I had a new account, new debit card, and the distinct feeling that I'd only begun to uncover the extent of my family's exploitation. Margaret, seeing my distress, suggested we grab lunch before meeting the real estate agent, giving me time to process these revelations. Over sandwiches at a small cafe near Lake Merrill, I finally voiced the question that had been haunting me all morning. How did I let this happen, Margaret? I'm not stupid or weak. How did I become so blind to their manipulation? Margaret considered me thoughtfully. It wasn't a single moment, Ellie. It was 1,000 tiny compromises, each one seemingly reasonable at the time. You gave up a little piece of yourself each day until giving became your identity. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. And they took advantage of your greatest strength, your capacity for love, and twisted it into a weapon against you. Her words resonated with painful clarity. Each sacrifice had seemed logical, necessary even. Of course I should help with the twins when they were newborns. Of course I should contribute to their education if Vanessa and Brandon were struggling. Of course I should put my own needs last. That's what mothers did, wasn't it? Except Thomas had never made those same sacrifices. Brandon certainly didn't. The expectation of self-erasure had fallen solely on my shoulders, and I had accepted it without question. I don't want to be angry for the rest of my life, I said quietly. But right now, I'm so furious I can barely breathe. Good, Margaret said with surprising vehemence. You should be angry. Anger is telling you that a boundary has been violated. Listen to it. We finished lunch and drove the short distance to the cottage, pulling up just as the real estate agent arrived. The property sat on a quiet lane about half a mile from the lake, partially hidden by mature oak trees. It was smaller than I'd imagined. From the listing, a simple one-bedroom structure with a covered porch and a detached garden shed. The pale blue paint was peeling in places, and the garden had clearly been neglected. Yet something about it called to me. Perhaps it was the way the afternoon light filtered through the trees, creating dappled patterns on the weathered porch. Or maybe it was the sense of possibility that seemed to emanate from its humble frame. This little house had no expectations of me. It demanded nothing. It simply existed, waiting to be transformed. The interior was even more inspiring. The previous owner had been an artist too. The main room had been set up as a studio, with north-facing windows that flooded the space with perfect, indirect light. The kitchen was tiny but functional, with vintage cabinets that needed only a fresh coat of paint to shine again. The bedroom overlooked a small backyard where wildflowers grew in cheerful disarray. "It needs work," the agent said apologetically, noting my silence as I wandered from room to room. "The owner is motivated to sell quickly because she's moved to assisted living. Her family just wants to close the estate." "It's perfect," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Absolutely perfect." Margaret, who had been examining the water heater with a critical eye, looked up in surprise. "Are you sure, Ellie? The plumbing will need updating, and that roof won't last another winter." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "This is where I'm meant to be." The real estate agent beamed. "Wonderful. If you're prepared to make an offer today, we can potentially close within the month, given the seller's eagerness." As we sat at the small kitchen table completing the paperwork, I felt a surreal sense of stepping into a new dimension, one where Eleanor Wilson made decisions based on her own desires rather than everyone else's needs. The cottage would be mine, a sanctuary where I could finally prioritize my health, rediscover my passion for painting, and build relationships with my grandchildren that weren't based on exploitation. I signed the offer, including a sizable earnest money deposit from my new bank account. The agent promised to submit it immediately and expected a response by the following day. As we walked back to Margaret's car, I felt lighter than I had in years, despite the confrontation that still awaited me at Vanessa's house. "You're making the right choice," Margaret said as we drove back toward Cedar Heights. "I haven't seen you this alive since before Thomas died." I gazed out the window, watching the scenery change from the natural beauty of the lake area to the manicured affluence of Vanessa's neighborhood. I just hope the twins understand. I couldn't bear it, if they thought I was abandoning them. Margaret pulled into her driveway so I could collect my overnight bag. "Children are resilient, Ellie, and they're old enough to understand more than Vanessa gives them credit for. Just be honest with them about why you're moving, about how much you love them, and about the kind of relationship you want to build with them going forward." Armed with Margaret's advice and the confidence of having taken concrete steps toward independence, I drove to Vanessa's house. It was just after 3, giving me time to collect myself before the twins arrived home from school. To my surprise, Brandon's car was in the driveway alongside Vanessa's SUV. They weren't usually home at this hour on a weekday. I parked behind Vanessa's vehicle and sat for a moment, steeling myself for whatever awaited inside. Then I grabbed my overnight bag and walked to the front door, using my key for what might be the last time. The scene that greeted me was unexpected. Vanessa and Brandon sat at the dining room table with an older couple I recognized as Brandon's parents, Robert and Carol Reynolds. All 4 looked up as I entered, their conversation halting abruptly. The atmosphere was tense, like I'd interrupted an argument. "Mom," Vanessa said, her voice artificially bright. "You're back early. We thought you'd be here when the twins got home from school." "That was my plan," I replied cautiously, setting my bag down. I didn't expect a family meeting. "Robert?" Reynolds stood, extending his hand with the practiced charm that his son had inherited. "Eleanor, so good to see you. We were just discussing the twins' education. Please, join us." I shook his hand reflexively, noting the hint of discomfort in his expression. Something was definitely off about this gathering. "Actually," Brandon interjected smoothly, "we've just about wrapped up. Dad, Mom, I'll walk you to your car." Carol Reynolds gave me a strange look, part sympathy, part guilt, as she gathered her purse. Eleanor, we've always appreciated everything you do for Parker and Penelope. They're lucky to have you. The formality of her statement, coupled with the past tense "we've always appreciated," raised my suspicions further. As Brandon escorted his parents out, I turned to Vanessa. What's going on? She busied herself straightening papers on the table, avoiding my eyes. Nothing. Just a regular visit from Brandon's parents. They stop by sometimes when they're in town. Vanessa, I kept my voice level. Don't lie to me. What were you discussing? With Robert and Carol? She sighed dramatically, finally meeting my gaze. If you must know, we were talking about the twins' tuition. Since you've apparently decided to abandon your commitment to their education, we needed to explore other options. The accusation stung, but I refused to be manipulated. I didn't abandon anything. I made it clear that I can no longer prioritize their private school fees over my own health and security. That's a boundary, not an abandonment. Semantics, Vanessa muttered, gathering the papers into a folder. The point is, you've put us in an impossible position. The spring semester payment is due next month, and we don't have $4,800 just lying around. I watched her tuck the folder into a drawer, wondering if she truly believed her family's financial predicament was my responsibility to solve. Your husband's parents seem financially comfortable, I observed. Have they been contributing to the twins' education all along? A flash of something, guilt perhaps, or annoyance at being caught in another lie, crossed Vanessa's face. They help when they can, but they have 3 other grandchildren to consider, and Robert is semi-retired. Before I could press further, the front door opened and Brandon returned, his business smile firmly in place. Well, that's taken care of. Dad understands the situation completely. What situation would that be? I asked pointedly. Brandon's smile faltered slightly. Just family matters, Ellie. Nothing for you to worry about. He checked his watch, with exaggerated concern. The twins will be home any minute. Vanessa, didn't you say you had that conference call at 4? It was a transparent attempt to separate us, to prevent further questioning. Vanessa nodded, already reaching for her laptop. That's right. I need to prepare for that. Mom, the twins have been asking about you all day. Why don't you wait for them in the kitchen? I put some cookie dough in the fridge. Maybe you could bake with them while I'm on my call. The casual way they attempted to redirect me back into my caretaker role, as if the confrontations of the past 24 hours had never happened, was breathtaking in its audacity. Did they truly believe I would just fall back into line, baking cookies while they schemed about finances in the other room? Actually, I said, I'd like a word with both of you before the twins arrive, about my living arrangements going forward. Brandon's smile disappeared entirely. Ellie, we've all been under stress lately. Things were said yesterday that none of us meant. There's no need to make hasty decisions about living arrangements. I've made an offer on a cottage near Lake Merrill, I stated flatly. If all goes, well, I'll be moving within the month. Vanessa's head snapped up from her laptop. You what? Without discussing it with us first? I wasn't aware I needed your permission to purchase my own home, I replied, keeping my voice deliberately calm. I'm 68 years old, Vanessa. I think I'm capable of making housing decisions independently. Brandon stepped closer, lowering his voice as if speaking to someone volatile or confused. Ellie, be reasonable. You don't have the financial resources for a property purchase, not if you want any kind of retirement security. The condescension in his tone made my blood boil, especially after what I'd learned at the bank that morning. Interesting that you're suddenly concerned about my financial security, Brandon, given that you're the one who opted me out of extended health benefits during my retirement processing. His expression froze, then quickly rearranged itself into wounded innocence. I have no idea what you're talking about. I helped you with that paperwork as a favor. If there was a misunderstanding about your benefits, save it, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. The hospital billing department is investigating. If they find evidence of deliberate misrepresentation, they'll take appropriate action. Brandon's face darkened. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts, just like it's a fact that I'll be moving out, and I'll no longer be paying the twins' tuition. Which brings me to another question. Have your parents been contributing to the tuition all along while you convinced me my help was essential? Vanessa stepped between us, her expression panicked. Mom, stop it. You're being paranoid. No one has been trying to take advantage of you. We're family. Family doesn't exploit each other, I said quietly. Family doesn't lie about finances or manipulate grandchildren to maintain control. The sound of a school bus stopping outside interrupted our confrontation. Vanessa's eyes darted to the window, then back to me. The twins are home. I'm begging you, don't upset them with all this. They've been worried about you since you didn't come home last night. Despite everything, I had no desire to traumatize Parker and Penelope. I won't upset them, but I will tell them the truth, in an age-appropriate way, about my plans to move. You can't, Brandon began, but the sound of small feet pounding up the front walkway silenced him. The front door burst open and the twins tumbled in, still in their Westlake uniforms, backpacks bouncing as they ran. Grandma! Penelope spotted me first, launching herself across the room into my arms. You're back! Mom said you were sick and had to stay with your friend. Parker approached more cautiously, his eyes searching my face. At 9, he was becoming more perceptive, more aware of adult complexities. Are you feeling better now? I hugged them both, breathing in the familiar scent of their shampoo and the indefinable sweetness that was uniquely theirs. No matter what happened with Vanessa and Brandon, these children were innocent. They deserved love and honesty. I am feeling better. Thank you for asking, I said, smoothing Parker's hair back from his forehead. But I need to talk to you both about some changes that are happening. Vanessa made a small noise of protest behind me, which I ignored. Why don't we go sit in the living room? I suggested, leading the twins away from their parents. I want to hear all about school today, and then I have some exciting news to share. As we settled onto the sofa, I was acutely aware of Vanessa and Brandon hovering in the doorway, monitoring every word. But I focused entirely on Parker and Penelope, asking about their day, admiring the art project Penelope had brought home, listening to Parker's excitement about an upcoming science fair. Only when they had shared their news did I gently transition to mine. I have something important to tell you both. You know how everyone needs their own special place? A place where they feel happy and safe? They nodded solemnly. Well, I've found a place like that for myself. A little cottage near Lake Merrill with a garden and room for an art studio. I'm going to be moving there soon. Penelope's brow furrowed in confusion. But you live here with us. I've been living here to help your mom and dad take care of you, I explained carefully. But now that you're both getting bigger and more independent, it's time for me to have my own home again. But who will make my lunch for school? Penelope asked, her voice small. Mom always puts in too much spinach. I smiled, stroking her cheek. I'll teach your mom my special sandwich recipe. And the wonderful thing about having my own house is that you can come visit me. We can bake cookies together and paint by the lake, and you can even have sleepovers sometimes. Would you like that? Penelope nodded hesitantly, but Parker remained silent, studying me with his serious gray eyes, Thomas's eyes. Is it because I didn't clean my room good enough? He finally asked. Mom said you were mad because we're messy. The manipulation was so transparent it made my heart ache. No, sweetheart. It has nothing to do with your room or anything you've done. This is about what I need at my age. Remember how we talked about listening to your body when it tells you something is wrong? Well, my heart has been telling me I need to slow down and take better care of myself. Your heart is sick? Parker's eyes widened in alarm. Like Grandpa's was? I hadn't intended to frighten them, but I wouldn't lie either. I have a condition that needs medication and rest. The good news is, unlike when your grandpa was sick, there are very good treatments available now. But part of getting better means I need to have a quieter life with less stress. And we stress you out, Parker concluded sadly. No, you don't stress me out at all. I hurried to reassure him. Being with you and Penelope is one of the greatest joys of my life. It's just that I've been doing too much, helping with the house, driving to all your activities, staying up late to finish chores. My body needs me to do less and rest more. Penelope leaned against me, her small hand patting my arm. I don't want your heart to be sick, Grandma. You should rest lots and lots. The simple compassion of a 7-year-old put their parents' selfishness into stark relief. These children, despite being raised in an atmosphere of materialism and entitlement, still retained their natural empathy. There was hope for them yet. Thank you, sweetheart. That means a lot to me. I looked at both twins, making sure I had their full attention. The most important thing for you to remember is that me moving to my own house doesn't change how much I love you. I will always be your grandmother, no matter where I live. Will you still come to my soccer games? Parker asked. And my dance recitals? Penelope added. As many as I can, I promised. And you can call me anytime you want to talk. Your parents can bring you to visit me, or I can come visit you. We'll still be in each other's lives, just in a different way. They seemed to accept this, though I could tell they were still processing the news. Children are adaptable by nature, and with proper support, they would adjust to this change far better than their parents were likely to. Speaking of their parents, Vanessa had disappeared from the doorway during our conversation, but Brandon remained, his expression unreadable. When the twins ran off to change out of their school uniforms, he approached me. That was nicely done, he said, his tone carefully neutral. They seemed to be taking it well. I stood, unwilling to let him tower over me during this conversation. Children are resilient when given honest explanations and emotional reassurance, something to remember going forward when you're not relying on me to manage their feelings. Brandon's professional mask slipped, revealing a flash of anger. You know, Ellie, for someone who claims to care about family, you're being remarkably selfish. Vanessa is devastated by all this. Is she devastated that I'm moving out, or that her financial arrangements are being disrupted? I countered. Both, obviously. You're her mother. Despite what you seem to believe, she loves you and values your presence in our home beyond any practical considerations. I studied his face, searching for sincerity and finding only calculation. If that's true, why did she tell the twins I was angry about their messy rooms? Why use them as emotional pawns? He had no good answer for that, instead pivoting to a different approach. Look, we all said things yesterday that were hurtful. What if we agree to start fresh? You don't need to move out. We can adjust the financial arrangements to better respect your needs. Maybe you'd like a monthly stipend for your contribution to the household. The suggestion, that I could be bought off with an allowance like a child, was so offensive, I almost laughed. Brandon, I'm not one of your clients you can smooth talk into a disadvantageous deal. My decision is made. I'm moving to the cottage, and I'll be arranging my own financial affairs going forward. His expression hardened. Just remember, Ellie, family relationships are a two-way street. If you insist on this path, don't be surprised if access to the twins becomes complicated. The threat was barely veiled, and it hit its mark. My greatest fear was losing my relationship with Parker and Penelope. Are you threatening to keep my grandchildren from me if I don't continue financially supporting your lifestyle? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Brandon's eyes widened slightly, perhaps realizing he'd overplayed his hand. Of course not. I'm simply pointing out that logistics will be more challenging once you're living across town. We all have busy schedules. I see. I held his gaze steadily. In that case, I should inform you that I've retained copies of all my tuition payments to Westlake Academy over the past 4 years. If there are ever any logistical challenges preventing me from seeing my grandchildren, I'll be happy to discuss those payments with the IRS, specifically whether they constituted taxable gifts to you and Vanessa, which I don't believe were ever declared on your tax returns. It was a shot in the dark. I hadn't actually consulted with anyone about the tax implications of those payments. But judging from the way the color drained from Brandon's face, my arrow had found its target. There's no need for threats, he said stiffly. We would never keep the twins from you. You're their grandmother. I'm glad we understand each other, I replied, gathering my purse. Now, if you'll excuse me, I promised Margaret I'd be back for dinner. Please tell the twins I'll call them tomorrow. As I walked to my car, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the relationship with my daughter that might never be repaired, worry for my grandchildren growing up in such a materialistic environment, but predominantly a profound sense of relief. I had stood my ground. I had spoken my truth. And for the first time in decades, I had put my own well-being first without apologizing for it. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more confrontations, more manipulations, more difficult conversations. But as I drove away from the house that had been my gilded cage for the past 7 years, I felt something sprouting in my chest alongside the physical damage to my heart. The tender shoots of self-respect, pushing through the soil of sacrifice and blooming in the light of new possibilities. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. My offer on the cottage was accepted the day after I submitted it, and with Margaret's help, I navigated the accelerated closing process. The elderly owner's family was eager to settle her affairs, and my ability to pay in cash eliminated many of the usual complications. Meanwhile, Denise from hospital billing worked miracles, retroactively reinstating my extended health benefits and securing reimbursement for medication expenses I'd paid out of pocket. For the first time in years, I felt the universe aligning in my favor rather than conspiring against me. My relationship with Vanessa, however, deteriorated further. After my conversation with the twins, she had retreated into a cold, formal politeness that was somehow more painful than outright anger. She arranged for me to speak with Parker and Penelope by phone every evening, but she was always hovering in the background, monitoring every word. Brandon, after his veiled threat had backfired, avoided me entirely, leaving for work before I woke and returning after I'd retreated to the guest house. I continued staying with Margaret most nights, returning to Vanessa's only to pack my belongings and spend time with the twins. The guest house that had been my home for 7 years now felt like a hotel room, transitional, impersonal, no longer mine. I was surprised by how little I had accumulated that truly mattered to me. Clothes, a few books, some photographs. The rest, furniture, kitchenware, linens, had all belonged to Vanessa and Brandon's vision of a perfectly appointed pool house. "You're traveling light into your new life," Margaret observed as she helped me sort through my possessions. "That's not necessarily a bad thing." I held up a cashmere sweater Vanessa had given me for Christmas 3 years ago, a beautiful garment I'd worn only twice because I was always too busy cooking, cleaning, or chasing after the twins to risk staining. Keep or donate?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Does it bring you joy or obligation?" "Obligation," I admitted, placing it in the donation pile. It was always more about Vanessa's image of what her mother should wear than my actual taste or lifestyle. Item by item, we worked through my belongings, separating what would come with me to the cottage from what would be left behind or given away. The process was unexpectedly cathartic, each decision a tiny reclamation of my identity. No, I didn't need the formal dresses I'd worn to Brandon's business functions. Yes, I would keep the worn sketchbooks filled with drawings I'd managed to create in stolen moments over the years. No to the expensive face creams Vanessa insisted would erase my wrinkles. Yes to the comfortable walking shoes I'd never had time to properly break in. By the end of the week, my life had been distilled into 6 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases, an embarrassingly small collection for a woman of 68. Margaret, seeing my dismay as we loaded the boxes into her car, squeezed my shoulder. "It's not about the volume, Ellie, it's about what comes next. You're not defined by what you're leaving behind." I nodded, trying to embrace her perspective. Still, there was something humbling about seeing my material existence reduced to what would fit in the trunk of a mid-sized sedan. After decades of maintaining homes for others, I had remarkably little to show for it. The cottage closing was scheduled for Tuesday morning, less than 2 weeks after I'd first toured the property. Margaret drove me to the title company, where I signed dozens of documents and handed over a cashier's check that represented most of my remaining savings. When the final paper was signed, the agent handed me a set of keys attached to a small blue ribbon. "Congratulations, Ms. Wilson. The cottage is officially yours." I stared at the keys in my palm, feeling their weight, not just the physical metal, but the responsibility and freedom they represented. Margaret captured the moment with her phone. "Camera. Your first home that's truly yours," she said, showing me the photo. "No husband, no daughter, no son-in-law, just Eleanor Wilson, homeowner." In the picture, I looked simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff contemplating both the danger and the magnificent view. "Let's go see your new place," Margaret suggested. "We can measure for furniture and start making a list of what you'll need." The cottage welcomed us with afternoon sunlight streaming through dusty windows. Without the emotional charge of seeing it for the first time, I could now assess it more critically. The plumbing that would indeed need updating, the roof that showed signs of age, the ancient hot water heater that groaned ominously when I tested a faucet. But these were concrete problems with practical solutions, unlike the complex emotional maze I'd been navigating at Vanessa's. "The bathroom is tiny," Margaret noted, "but functional, and that clawfoot tub has potential." "The kitchen needs a complete overhaul," I added. "But I can manage with a hot plate and microwave until I save enough for renovations." We moved through each room, measuring and making notes. The north-facing studio would need minimal work, just cleaning and perhaps fresh paint. The bedroom was small but peaceful, with a window seat overlooking the wild backyard. The living area had built-in bookshelves that I already envisioned filled with art books and novels I'd never had time to read. "It's perfect," I said, meaning it despite the property's obvious flaws. "Absolutely perfect." Margaret consulted her list. "With your approval, I've arranged for a cleaning crew to come tomorrow. They'll get everything spotless so you can start moving in. The roof and plumbing inspections are scheduled for Thursday, and I've asked my nephew Ryan to look at that water heater. He's a contractor and owes me more favors than he can count." I looked at her in amazement. "You've thought of everything." "That's what friends do," she said simply. "You'd have done the same for me." The truth of her statement humbled me. Once, I would have moved mountains to help a friend in need. Somehow, over the years of serving Vanessa's family, I'd lost that capacity, not because I'd stopped caring, but because I'd been left with no resources, time, or energy to offer others. In reclaiming my independence, I was also reclaiming my ability to be a true friend. That evening, after we'd returned to Margaret's house, I called the twins for our nightly conversation. Vanessa answered, her voice artificially bright. "Mom, we were just about to call you. The twins have exciting news." I could hear Parker and Penelope chattering in the background, their voices overlapping in their eagerness to share. "Put them on," I said, smiling despite the tension between Vanessa and me. "I want to hear all about it." There was a shuffling sound, then Parker's voice came through clearly. Grandma, guess what? Dad's parents are taking us to Disney World for spring break. We're going to stay in the castle and everything. My heart sank. Spring break was just 3 weeks away, exactly when I'd planned to invite the twins to spend a few days at the cottage once I was settled. But of course, I couldn't compete with Disney World, nor should I try. That's wonderful, sweetheart, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. You'll have such an amazing time. Penelope grabbed the phone next. We're going to meet all the princesses. And Grandpa Robert said I can get a special dress for the princess breakfast. You'll look beautiful, I assured her. Make sure your mom takes lots of pictures so I can see everything when you get back. We chatted for a few more minutes about their trip and their day at school before Vanessa took the phone back. They're so excited, she said. Dad offered to take them as a surprise. He and Mom feel bad that they haven't spent as much time with the twins as they would like. The subtext was clear. Robert and Carol Reynolds were stepping up their grandparental involvement now that I was stepping back. It was a strategic move, designed to show the twins they wouldn't lack for grandparental attention in my absence. Part of me admired Vanessa's manipulation. Another part ached at the realization that my grandchildren were being used as emotional chess pieces. That's very generous of them, I said neutrally. The twins will create wonderful memories. Yes. Well, Vanessa's voice cooled. We all do what we can for family. The barb was intended to sting, and it did, but not as deeply as it would have even a week ago. My sense of self-worth was no longer exclusively tied to my role as a sacrificial grandmother. Speaking of family, I said, changing the subject, I closed on the cottage today. I'll be moving in officially this weekend. I'd love for you and the twins to come see it once I'm settled. There was a pause. Then Vanessa said, We'll have to check our schedule. Things are quite busy with Brandon's new development and the twins' activities. Of course. Just let me know what works. I kept my tone pleasant but firm. And Vanessa? I want you to understand that my door will always be open to you, even if you're angry with me right now. You're still my daughter, and I still love you. Another pause, longer this time. Then, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, she said, I have to go. The twins need their bath before bedtime. After we hung up, I sat on Margaret's guest bed, turning my new house keys over in my hand. The conversation with Vanessa had left me melancholy, but not devastated. There was a glimmer of vulnerability in her final response, a crack in the wall of anger she'd constructed. Perhaps, given time and space, we might find our way back to some version of a healthy mother-daughter relationship. Margaret knocked, lightly on the open door. Everything okay? You look thoughtful. Just processing, I said, showing her the keys. It's really happening. I'm really leaving. She sat beside me on the bed. Having second thoughts? Not second thoughts exactly. More like mourning what I hoped my relationship with Vanessa would be, while accepting what it actually is. Margaret nodded. That's the hardest part, of setting boundaries with family, grieving the relationship you wanted while standing firm in protecting yourself from the relationship you have. The wisdom of her words settled over me like a warm blanket. The ache of Vanessa's emotional distance was real, but it wasn't a reason to abandon my journey toward self-reclamation. Both could exist simultaneously. Love for my daughter and commitment to my own well-being. The next few days passed in a blur of practical activity. The cleaning crew transformed the cottage, erasing years of dust and neglect. Margaret's nephew confirmed that the water heater needed replacement but could limp along for another month or two. The roof inspector identified several areas needing repair before next winter, but nothing that required immediate attention. The plumbing was old but functional, with the bathroom requiring the most urgent updates. By Friday, the cottage was clean and ready for my belongings. Margaret and I made trips to discount furniture stores where I purchased the essentials, A simple bed frame and mattress, a small dining table with 2 chairs, a comfortable reading chair for the living room, and basic kitchen supplies. Everything was delivered Saturday morning, and by afternoon, my modest collection of possessions had been transferred from the boxes in Margaret's garage to my new home. Standing in the middle of the sparsely furnished living room, I experienced a moment of panic. The cottage suddenly seemed too empty, too quiet, too mine. After decades of existing in spaces dominated by others' needs and preferences, the freedom to arrange my life exactly as I wished was almost overwhelming. "It looks barren now," Margaret acknowledged, reading my expression. "But you'll fill it with new memories, new treasures. Give it time." I nodded, trying to embrace the potential rather than focus on the emptiness. "I should probably go back to Vanessa's one last time," I said, "to say goodbye to the twins properly and collect anything I might have missed." Margaret looked concerned. "Want me to come with you?" I shook my head. "This is something I need to do alone, but thank you for everything." She hugged me tightly. "Call me when you're back home. I'll bring dinner and we can have a proper housewarming." Home. The word sounded strange when applied to the cottage. Not wrong, just unfamiliar, like clothes that fit perfectly but haven't, yet conformed to the unique contours of one's body. I drove to Vanessa's house with mixed emotions, sadness at this formal ending, determination to maintain my boundaries, hope that someday my departure might lead to a healthier relationship with my daughter and grandchildren. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed several unfamiliar cars parked along the street. Brandon's Lexus was there, as was Vanessa's SUV. Perhaps they were hosting friends for dinner? The front door opened before I could ring the bell. Brandon stood there, dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, looking surprised to see me. "Ellie," he said, his voice oddly formal. "We weren't expecting you." "I texted Vanessa this morning that I'd be stopping by," I replied, already sensing something was off, "to say goodbye to the twins and collect the last of my things from the guest house." "Ah." He glanced over his shoulder toward the living room where I could hear multiple voices. "We're actually hosting a small gathering for clients and friends. The twins are at a play date until 6. The calculated timing couldn't have been coincidental. Vanessa had seen my text and deliberately scheduled the twins to be away during my visit." "I see," I said, working to keep disappointment from my voice. "In that case, I'll just get my things from the guest house and be on my way. I wouldn't want to intrude on your event." Brandon hesitated, then stepped aside to let me enter. "Vanessa is in the kitchen. You might want to say hello before you go out back." I nodded and moved through the foyer toward the kitchen, passing the living room where about a dozen well-dressed people stood chatting with drinks in hand. Several glanced curiously in my direction, but no one spoke to me. I felt acutely out of place in my simple jeans and cotton sweater. Vanessa was arranging appetizers on a tray when I entered the kitchen. She looked up, her expression freezing somewhere between surprise and dismay. "Mom, I didn't realize you were coming by today." The lie was so transparent it almost made me laugh. "I texted you this morning," I said mildly, "but I can see you're busy. I'll just get my remaining things from the guest house and go." She had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "I'm sorry. I've been so busy preparing for this gathering that I must have missed your message. The twins will be disappointed they missed you." "I'll call them tomorrow," I promised. "And perhaps you could bring them to see the cottage next weekend. It's not fully furnished yet, but it's coming along." Vanessa's gaze slid away from mine. "Next weekend is Parker's soccer tournament. We'll be away most of Saturday and Sunday. The weekend after then? I'll have to check our calendar." She picked up the tray of appetizers. "I should get these out to our guests. The guest house is unlocked if you want to get your things." I watched her sweep out of the kitchen without waiting for my response. The message was clear. I was now an inconvenience to be managed, not family to be accommodated. The realization stung, but it also reinforced the rightness of my decision to leave. The guest house was exactly as I'd left it, with just a few personal items remaining: a cardigan forgotten in the closet, a novel on the nightstand, a small box of costume jewelry I'd meant to give to Penelope. I gathered these final possessions into a shopping bag, then took a last look around the space that had been my home for 7 years. Despite its elegant furnishings and generous proportions, I realized I had never felt truly comfortable here. It had always been an extension of Vanessa and Brandon's domain, not my own sanctuary. Even my bedroom had been subject to their design preferences and occasional intrusions. Privacy had been a luxury I was rarely afforded, with the twins barging in at all hours and Vanessa entering without knocking whenever she needed something. As I closed the guest house door behind me, I felt a weight lifting. Yes, there was sadness in this goodbye. But there was liberation, too. I was walking away, from a gilded cage toward an uncertain but authentic future. I had intended to slip away without further interaction, but as I crossed the backyard toward the side gate, I noticed a familiar figure on the patio. Carol Reynolds, Brandon's mother. She was alone, staring contemplatively into a glass of white wine. Our eyes met, and after a moment's hesitation, she raised her hand in greeting. Curiosity propelled me toward her. "Hello, Carol," I said politely. "Nice to see you again." She patted the chair beside her. "Join me for a moment, unless you're in a hurry." I set my shopping bag down and sat, intrigued by her unusual friendliness. In 7 years of family gatherings, Carol had always been cordial but distant, more interested in showcasing her designer outfits and expensive jewelry than in genuine conversation. "I hear you've bought a place of your own," she said, taking a sip of wine. "Near Lake Merrill?" I nodded, surprised she knew the location. "A small cottage, nothing fancy, but it suits me." "Good for you." There was unexpected sincerity in her voice. "Everyone deserves a space that's truly theirs." "Thank you," I said, studying her more carefully. Without the usual audience of family or friends, Carol seemed different, less poised, more authentic. The perfect makeup couldn't quite hide the fatigue around her eyes or the slight downturn of her mouth. "I wanted to apologize," she said abruptly, setting her wineglass down, "for the awkwardness when you found us all meeting that day. Robert and I... We weren't fully aware of the situation with the twins' tuition." My surprise must have shown on my face, because she continued quickly. "We were told you had volunteered to help with a portion as a gift to the twins. We had no idea you were covering the entire amount, or that it was creating financial strain for you. The revelation shouldn't have shocked me, given what I'd already learned about Vanessa and Brandon's deceptions, but somehow this additional layer of manipulation still had the power to wound." "I see," I said carefully. "And now that you know?" Carol glanced toward the house, ensuring we were still alone. "Robert and I have agreed to cover half the tuition going forward. Brandon and Vanessa will need to handle the rest, or make different educational choices for the children." Her expression softened. "We're not wealthy, Eleanor. Comfortable, yes, but not in a position to fund private education for all our grandchildren. Indefinitely." I appreciated her honesty. The twins would do well in public school. They're bright, adaptable children. "That's what I said," Carol exclaimed, then lowered her voice. "But you know how Brandon and Vanessa are about appearances. The right school, the right activities, the right address." I did know. The constant striving for status had been the driving force behind many of their decisions, including, I now realized, their insistence on having me live in their guest house. A live-in grandmother provided free childcare, certainly, but it also conveyed a certain image of family devotion and intergenerational harmony that looked good on Vanessa's carefully curated social media accounts. "May I ask you something, Carol?" I ventured. "And I hope you'll be honest with me." She nodded, curiosity evident in her expression. Did you and Robert ever pay any portion of the twins' tuition? In the past, I mean. Carol's eyebrows rose. No, never. Brandon told us they had it covered through their own income and your generous help with occasional expenses. She paused, comprehension dawning. They told you we were contributing, didn't they? Among other things, I confirmed, the final pieces of the financial deception falling into place. They told me many things that I'm now discovering weren't entirely true. Carol looked troubled. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Truly. For what it's worth, Robert and I have always appreciated how devoted you've been to the twins. They're fortunate to have you in their lives. Her sincerity was unexpected but welcome, a small validation after years of feeling my contributions were taken for granted. Thank you, Carol. That means a lot to me. She hesitated, then added, I know it's not my place, but Brandon mentioned there might be some tension regarding your relationship with the twins going forward. I want you to know that Robert, and I would never support limiting your access to your grandchildren. That would be cruel and unnecessary. Relief washed over me. If Brandon's own parents wouldn't back him in using the twins as leverage, his threat lost much of its power. I appreciate that. All I want is to maintain a loving relationship with Parker and Penelope, even as I establish healthier boundaries with their parents. Carol nodded, understanding in her eyes. Boundaries are important, especially with family. Something I wish I'd learned earlier in life. She glanced toward the house again. I should get back to the gathering before I'm missed. But Eleanor, good luck with your new home. I hope it brings you joy. As she walked away, I sat for a moment longer, processing our conversation. It had been illuminating in ways I hadn't expected, not just confirming Vanessa and Brandon's financial duplicity, but also revealing a potential ally in Carol. Perhaps she too had experienced the subtle manipulation and status anxiety that drove her son and daughter-in-law's behavior. I gathered my shopping bag and made my way to the side gate, slipping out without returning to the main house. There were no proper goodbyes, no final hugs with the twins, no closure to mark the end of my 7 years in this place. But perhaps that was fitting. My departure wasn't a clean break, but the beginning of a transition. From exploitation to authenticity, from sacrifice to self-care, from enabling to empowerment. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror at the imposing house growing, smaller behind me. For a moment, I felt a pang of worry for the twins, growing up in an environment where appearances mattered more than integrity. Then I remembered Carol's unexpected alliance and my own continued presence in their lives. Parker and Penelope would have models of different values, different choices, and perhaps, as they grew older, they would recognize the difference. The cottage welcomed me with late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, turning the simple rooms golden. I set my shopping bag on the kitchen counter and moved through the space, touching the walls, adjusting the curtains, getting a feel for the place as truly mine. The emptiness that had seemed stark earlier now felt full of possibility. I opened the bedroom window, letting in the scent of early spring, damp earth and budding flowers. In the backyard, birds hopped among the overgrown shrubs, untroubled by human concerns. A gentle breeze stirred the branches of the old oak tree, creating dappled patterns of light and shadow across the grass. For the first time since Thomas died, I allowed myself to imagine a future shaped by my own desires rather than others' needs. I could plant a vegetable garden in that sunny spot near the fence, transform the overgrown tangle of flowers into an ordered but natural landscape, set up an easel by the north-facing window, and finally pursue the painting I'd abandoned decades ago. I could invite the twins for weekends filled with messy art projects and homemade cookies, building relationships based on genuine connection rather than obligation. I could join Margaret's book club, reconnect with other old friends, make new ones through community classes or volunteer work. Most importantly, I could prioritize my health, take my medication consistently, eat foods that nourished my body, exercise gently, rest when tired. I could learn to listen to my heart, not just in the physical sense, but in all the ways it had been trying to guide me for years. The phone rang, interrupting my reverie. It was Margaret, calling to check on me. "All moved in?" she asked. "Yes, everything's here, which isn't saying much." I laughed. "But it already feels more like home than the guest house ever did." "That's because it's yours," Margaret said simply. "Not just legally, but spiritually. It's a space where you get to be fully yourself." She paused. "How did it go at Vanessa's?" I sighed, giving her a brief account of the gathering I'd interrupted and my surprising conversation with Carol. "The twins weren't there. I'll have to arrange another time to see them properly." "And how are you feeling about all of it?" Margaret's question was gentle but direct. I considered for a moment before answering. Sad, but not regretful. Concerned about maintaining my relationship with the twins, but determined to find a way. And underneath it all, something I haven't felt in a very long time. "What's that?" "Hope," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. Hope that I still have time to create a life that feels authentically mine. Hope that my relationship with Vanessa might eventually heal. Once she adjusts to the new boundaries. Hope that the twins will understand someday why I had to make this choice. "That's a lot of hope," Margaret observed. "I'm glad it's found you again." After we hung up, I unpacked my small shopping bag, placing the cardigan in the closet and the novel on my new bedside table. The box of costume jewelry I set on the kitchen counter, making a mental note to give it to Penelope when I next saw her. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out a blank piece of paper and began to sketch the view from my bedroom. Window, the old oak tree, the wild tangle of the garden. My hand was rusty, the lines hesitant at first, then gradually growing more confident as muscle memory returned. As the light faded and shadows lengthened across my new home, I realized I hadn't thought about Vanessa or Brandon for over an hour. My heart felt steady, my breathing easy. For the first time in years, I wasn't pushing aside my own needs to attend to someone else's comfort or convenience. I was simply being Eleanor Wilson, not a grandmother, not a mother, not a caretaker. Just a woman in her 60s with a heart condition, a modest home, and the rest of her life stretching before her like an empty canvas, waiting to be filled with colors of her own choosing. When Margaret arrived with dinner an hour later, she found me still sketching by the window, lost in the simple joy of creation. She set the food containers on the kitchen counter and came to look over my shoulder. "You're smiling," she observed. "Really smiling. I haven't seen that in years." I looked up, realizing she was right. The muscles in my face felt different. Relaxed, genuine, alive. "Welcome home, Ellie," Margaret said softly. "To your cottage and to yourself." I set down my pencil and stood, surveying my new domain. Humble, but mine, imperfect, but full of potential, exactly like its owner. "Yes," I agreed, feeling the truth of it settle in my bones. "I'm finally home." Spring arrived in full glory at my little cottage by Lake Merrill. The wild tangle of the backyard revealed itself to be a forgotten garden, daffodils pushing through the soil, forsythia bursting into yellow bloom, even a few early tulips nodding their colorful heads in the morning breeze. Each new discovery felt like a gift from the previous owner, a fellow artist who had cultivated beauty even in the most overlooked corners of the property. I'd been in my new home for almost a month now, settling into rhythms that honored my health and nurtured my spirit. Mornings began with medication and gentle stretching, followed by coffee on the porch as I watched birds flit among the oak branches. Afternoons were for painting or gardening, depending on the weather. Evenings brought books I'd waited decades to read or visits from Margaret. who had introduced me to neighbors and helped me navigate the practicalities of home ownership. My heart condition, finally receiving proper treatment, had stabilized. Dr. Hansen was pleased with my progress at my latest checkup, noting that my blood pressure had dropped significantly and the swelling in my ankles had subsided. "Whatever. Changes you've made," he'd said with approval. "Keep making them." The cottage itself was slowly transforming too. With Margaret's help, I'd painted the living room a soft sage green that made the north light seem warmer. The bedroom now had curtains I'd sewn myself from fabric found at a local thrift store. The kitchen remained largely untouched, a project for future months when my savings had recovered a bit. But I'd set up a small table by the window where I ate simple meals and watched the garden change day by day. The only shadow on my new life was the strained relationship with Vanessa and limited contact with the twins. Since moving out, I'd managed just 2 brief visits with Parker and Penelope, once when Vanessa reluctantly brought them to see the cottage, and once when I attended Parker's soccer game, afterwards taking them for ice cream with their mothers. Grudging permission. Our weekly phone calls continued, but they felt increasingly supervised, with Vanessa or Brandon always hovering nearby. Margaret noticed my melancholy one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. "You're thinking about the twins," she observed, passing me a glass of iced tea. I nodded, not bothering to deny it. "They should be back from Disney World by now. I've left 3 messages for Vanessa asking when I might see them, but she hasn't returned my calls." "Give it time, Ellie. Vanessa is still adjusting to the new normal. And the twins know you love them. That won't change because of distance or their parents' pettiness." I sighed, running my finger around the rim of my glass. "I just worry about the stories they're being told. When I picked them up for ice cream last week, Parker asked if I was still mad at Mommy for not giving me money. Obviously, they're hearing a very specific version of what happened." Margaret's expression hardened. "That's manipulation, pure and simple. Using children as pawns in adult conflicts is inexcusable." "I know. But what can I do? If I try to correct their understanding, I risk making them feel caught between their parents and me. That's not fair to them either." "You keep showing up," Margaret said firmly. "You keep loving them consistently and authentically. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. They'll figure out the truth eventually." I wanted to believe her, but the gnawing worry remained. Vanessa and Brandon controlled the narrative and the access. If they chose to cut me off entirely or poison the twins against me, what recourse would I have? The next morning, I was kneeling in the garden, clearing weeds from around emerging perennials, when a car pulled into my gravel driveway. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, surprised to see Carol Reynolds stepping out of a sleek silver sedan. "Eleanor," she called, waving as she approached. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," I assured her, though I was puzzled by her unexpected visit. "Would you like some coffee?" I was about to take a break anyway. Carol followed me into the cottage, her appraising gaze taking in my modest furnishings and freshly painted walls. If she was judging my simpler lifestyle, she gave no indication, instead commenting on the quality of light in the living room and admiring the view of the garden from the kitchen window. "Your place has wonderful bones," she said as I handed her a mug of coffee. "And that north-facing studio space is perfect for an artist." I gestured toward the small table. "Please, have a seat. I'm still working on getting more furniture, but it's comfortable enough for coffee." Carol settled across from me, her elegant attire, cream linen pants and a silk blouse, contrasting with my gardening clothes and the worn wooden table between us. She took a sip of coffee, then set the mug down deliberately. "I've come because I'm concerned about the twins," she said without preamble, "and about what's happening between you and Vanessa." My breath caught. Had things escalated? Was Vanessa planning to further restrict my access to Parker and Penelope? "What's happened?" I asked, trying to keep the alarm from my voice. Carol shook her head reassuringly. "Nothing specific, but the Disney trip was enlightening. Robert and I spent a week with Brandon, Vanessa, and the children, and certain patterns became impossible to ignore. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The twins asked about you constantly. Every Princess Castle was compared to Grandma Ellie's cottage. Every meal prompted comments about how you would have loved the restaurant or made better pancakes than the hotels. A small flame of joy kindled in my chest at this evidence that the twins were thinking of me, missing me. Meanwhile, Carol continued. Vanessa was clearly uncomfortable with these mentions. She repeatedly changed the subject or made comments about how you had abandoned the family because you didn't want to help anymore. Carol's expression reflected her distaste for these characterizations. By midweek, Robert had heard enough. He took Brandon aside and asked him directly what was going on. I waited, both eager and apprehensive to hear what had transpired. Brandon initially tried to dismiss it as a simple family disagreement, Carol said. But Robert can be quite persistent when he chooses to be. Eventually, the truth came out. About the tuition payments, about your health condition, about how they'd been relying on you financially and practically while allowing you to deplete your retirement savings. She met my eyes directly. Robert was furious. Brandon may be our son, but we didn't raise him to exploit a family member's generosity or to use children as emotional leverage. The validation from an unexpected quarter almost brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I'd questioned whether I was overreacting, whether my hurt was justified. To hear Brandon's own father condemn his behavior was powerfully affirming. What happened next? I asked. Robert made it clear that if Brandon and Vanessa continued to restrict your access to the twins or speak negatively about you to them, they could no longer count on our financial support, for tuition or anything else. Carol smiled slightly, at my obvious surprise. Robert may be semi-retired, but he still has significant influence in the business community where Brandon operates. It was a compelling argument. I don't know what to say, I admitted. I never expected you and Robert to intervene on my behalf. Carol's expression softened. Eleanor, we've known you for a decade. You've been nothing but devoted to those children. And frankly, watching how Vanessa and Brandon have treated you has been uncomfortable. It reminds me too much of behaviors I've witnessed, and sometimes enabled, in other contexts. Something in her tone suggested she was speaking from personal experience, perhaps regarding her own relationship with her son. But before I could explore this, she continued. The real reason I'm here is to invite you to Parker's birthday party next weekend. It's at our house. Robert's idea. He thought neutral territory might make it easier for everyone. She smiled, wryly. Plus, our swimming pool is a big draw for Parker's friends. Parker's turning 10, I murmured, more to myself than to Carol. Double digits. He's been talking about this birthday for months. He specifically asked if you would be there, Carol added. Several times, according to Robert, who was present when the guest list was being discussed. The knowledge that Parker had asked for me, had wanted me present on his special day, filled me with bittersweet joy. Of course I'll come. Thank you for letting me know. Don't thank me yet, Carol warned. Vanessa wasn't thrilled with the arrangement, but she could hardly object when Robert and I are hosting and funding the entire event. Still, it might be tense. I appreciated her honesty. I can handle tense. I just want to celebrate my grandson's birthday. Carol nodded, seeming satisfied. Good. The party starts at 1 next Saturday. Casual attire. The children will be swimming if the weather permits. She hesitated, then added, Perhaps you could come a bit early, around noon? Robert would like to speak with you privately before the other guests arrive. Curiosity piqued, I agreed. Carol finished her coffee, then rose to leave, pausing at the kitchen door to look back at my small home with its fresh paint and simple furnishings. You know, she said thoughtfully. When Brandon first told us you were moving out, he portrayed it as a crisis, a selfish abandonment that was disrupting their carefully balanced family life. But looking at you now, in your own space, this seems like exactly what you needed. Her perception startled me. It is, I acknowledged, though I miss the twins terribly. A balanced relationship with grandchildren doesn't require sacrificing your health, finances, or independence, Carol observed. Something I wish I'd understood earlier in my own grandparenting journey. With that cryptic comment, she thanked me for the coffee and departed, leaving me to ponder both her visit and the upcoming birthday party. The week passed in a flurry of preparation. I wanted to give Parker something special for his milestone. Birthday. Not expensive, but meaningful. After considerable thought, I decided to create a custom sketchbook, binding it myself with techniques I'd learned years ago in an art class. On the cover, I painted a soccer ball transforming into an eagle in flight, combining Parker's love of the sport with the freedom and possibility of his growing independence. Inside, I included several of my own sketches of places around Lake Merrill, with blank pages for Parker to add his own artwork when he visited. For Penelope, who would undoubtedly feel left out during her brother's celebration, I prepared a smaller gift, a bracelet made from polished stones I'd collected along the lakeshore, strung on elastic cord with her initial as a pendant. The morning of the party arrived clear and warm, perfect swimming weather. I dressed carefully in lightweight pants and a comfortable blouse, packed the wrapped gifts into a tote bag, and drove to the Reynolds home in the exclusive Hillcrest neighborhood. Their house was smaller than Vanessa and Brandon's, but more tastefully appointed with mature landscaping and a view of the valley below. As instructed, I arrived at noon, parking beside Robert's familiar Audi in the circular driveway. Carol answered the door, welcoming me warmly and leading me to the back patio where Robert sat reading a newspaper. He stood when he saw me, his handshake firm and direct, just like the man himself. "Eleanor, thank you for coming early," he said, gesturing for me to join him at the table. "Carol, would you mind checking on the caterers? I'd like a few minutes with Eleanor." When Carol had gone inside, Robert folded his newspaper and regarded me thoughtfully. "First, I want to apologize for not recognizing what was happening sooner. The financial arrangements regarding the twins' education were presented to us in a way that obscured your role and the burden it placed on you." "There's no need for apologies," I assured him. Vanessa and Brandon were careful to compartmentalize information. No one had the complete picture except them. "Nevertheless," Robert insisted, "I should have asked more questions when Brandon mentioned your health issues. Instead, I accepted his characterization that you were being dramatic about a minor condition." He shook his head in self-reproach. "My own father died of heart disease at 62. I know better than to dismiss cardiac symptoms." His genuine remorse touched me. "We all have blind spots where family is concerned," I offered. "I certainly did. For years, I couldn't see how Vanessa was taking advantage of my desire to help." Robert nodded, his expression grave. "Which brings me to the reason I wanted to speak with you privately. During our confrontation in Florida, Brandon admitted something concerning, that he had, as you suspected, interfered with your retirement health benefits. Not just by carelessness, but deliberately. Though I had suspected as much, having it confirmed still sent a chill through me. Why would he do that? According to him, reducing your health coverage meant more of your pension was available for living expenses, which indirectly benefited them since you were contributing so much to the household." Robert's disgust was evident. When I pointed out that this was potentially insurance fraud, he became defensive, insisting he was just helping you simplify your retirement paperwork, and that you had signed everything willingly. My hands trembled slightly as I processed this information. Brandon hadn't just taken advantage of my generosity. He had actively undermined my health security to serve his financial interests. What happens now? I asked quietly. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. That depends on you, Eleanor. If you want to pursue this legally, I would support that decision completely. Brandon's actions were unethical and possibly criminal. However, he held up a hand to forestall my response. I also understand if you'd prefer to focus on moving forward and maintaining your relationship with the twins. Sometimes family reconciliation requires letting go of past grievances, however justified. His understanding struck me as both genuine and unexpected. Robert Reynolds had always seemed like the quintessential businessman, focused on bottom lines and measurable outcomes. This nuanced perspective on family dynamics revealed depths I hadn't recognized. I don't want legal trouble for Brandon, I said after careful consideration. Not for my sake, and certainly not for the twins. What I want is a healthy relationship with my grandchildren and, eventually, a healed relationship with my daughter. Robert nodded, appearing relieved. I thought you might say that. In that case, I'd like to propose an arrangement that might help secure those goals. He outlined a plan whereby he and Carol would establish a trust fund specifically for the twins' education, removing that financial pressure from both Vanessa and Brandon and from me. Additionally, they would institute regular grandparent days, where both sets of grandparents would have scheduled time with the children. We're not trying to dictate your relationship with your grandchildren, Robert clarified, but having a structured arrangement, at least initially, might help normalize your presence in their lives again without Vanessa feeling threatened. The thoughtfulness of his proposal moved me deeply. Thank you, Robert. That sounds like a balanced solution for everyone, especially the twins. He smiled, extending his hand to shake on our agreement. Parker and Penelope are fortunate to have grandparents who care more about their well-being than about being right. He glanced toward the house, where Carol was visible through the window, directing caterers in setting up a buffet. Now, shall we join the preparations? I believe the birthday boy will be arriving with his parents shortly. The party unfolded better than I could have hoped. Parker was visibly delighted to see me, rushing across the patio to throw his arms around my waist the moment he arrived. Grandma Ellie, you came. Did you see the pool? I'm going to do cannonballs with my friends. Penelope was equally enthusiastic, though slightly miffed that it wasn't her birthday being celebrated. Her pout vanished completely when I slipped her the bracelet while the other adults were distracted with party arrangements. A secret present just for me? She whispered, eyes wide with pleasure. Because you missed me? Because I missed you, I confirmed, helping her fasten it around her wrist. And because you're special every day, not just on your birthday. Vanessa and Brandon remained coolly polite throughout the event, keeping their distance without being openly hostile. I followed their lead, focusing my attention on the children and the other guests rather than forcing uncomfortable interactions. There would be time for healing those relationships, but today was about Parker. When the moment came to open presents, I held my breath as Parker unwrapped my handmade sketchbook. Would it seem too simple compared to the electronic gadgets and expensive sports equipment his friends had given him? I needn't have worried. His face lit up as he examined the painted cover, fingers tracing the transformation from soccer ball to eagle. You made this? He asked in awe. Just for me? Just for you, I confirmed. For all your drawings and ideas. See? I started it with some pictures of places near my cottage that I think you might like to explore. He flipped through, the pages examining each sketch with serious attention. This is the best present, he declared with 10-year-old certainty. Because nobody else could make it, only you. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Vanessa watching this exchange, an unreadable expression on her face. For a moment, I thought, I glimpsed something like regret in her eyes before she turned away to help another child with a stubborn gift bag. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, I prepared to make my own exit, not wanting to overstay the tentative welcome I'd been granted. To my surprise, Parker ran up to me before I could leave, still clutching the sketchbook. "Mom says we can come visit your cottage next weekend," he announced. "She says we can even stay overnight if you have room." "Do you have room, Grandma?" Stunned, I glanced toward Vanessa, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed defensively but nodding in confirmation. "The twins have been asking," she said stiffly. "If it's convenient for you, they could come Saturday afternoon and stay until Sunday lunchtime." It was the first genuine olive branch she had extended since our confrontation over a month ago. "That would be wonderful," I said, careful to keep my tone measured despite the joy surging through me. "I don't have extra beds yet, but they could bring sleeping bags. We could set up a little camp in the living room." "Like an indoor camping trip?" Parker's excitement was contagious, drawing a small smile even from Vanessa. "Exactly like that," I agreed. "With hot chocolate and ghost stories." "Not too scary," Vanessa cautioned, her protective instinct showing through the tension between us. "Penelope has been having nightmares lately." It was such a normal, motherly concern, so different from the calculated manipulations of recent weeks, that it sparked hope in my heart. Perhaps there was still a path forward for us, not back to the unbalanced relationship we'd had before, but towards something new and healthier. "No scary stories," I promised. "Just adventures and happy endings." As I drove home from the party, the afternoon sun warming my face through the open car window, I reflected on the unexpected turns my life had taken in recent months. From the brink of financial and physical collapse, I had found my way to independence, health, and now, potentially, reconciliation. The road hadn't been smooth, and there were surely more challenges ahead, but for the first time in decades, I was facing life on my own terms. At home, I set my keys on the small table by the door and walked through my cottage, appreciating anew its simple beauty and the peace it offered. The north-facing studio now had an easel and organized art supplies. The bedroom held a comfortable bed with linens I had chosen myself. The kitchen, though still awaiting renovation, had become a place of nourishment rather than obligation. Outside, the garden beckoned with new growth and endless possibilities. I stepped onto the porch, breathing in the scent of spring and the promise of renewal it carried. Next weekend, the twins would fill these quiet rooms with laughter and questions. Perhaps someday Vanessa might visit too, ready to build a new kind of mother-daughter relationship based on mutual respect rather than expectation and obligation. For now, though, I had this moment, standing on my own porch, heart beating steadily in my chest, medications taken faithfully each morning, no one's needs to attend to but my own. I had weathered the crisis that began when my daughter refused to help with my heart medication, learning in the process that true family supports rather than exploits, lifts up rather than depletes. Most importantly, I had discovered that it's never too late to reclaim your life, to draw boundaries around your giving, to put your own oxygen mask on first. My heart was not only surviving now, it was thriving, and that made all the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.